April 15, 1931. Nuova Villa Tammaro Restaurant, Coney Island, 3:47 p.m. Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria was winning at cards. He had just laid down a straight flush and was reaching for another stack of chips when his enforcer, Charles Lucky Luciano, excused himself to the restroom. Masseria smiled, counting his money, completely unaware that Lucky had just sealed his death warrant. 4 minutes later, Masseria would be dead, and the American Mafia would be reborn. But this wasn't just an assassination. This was a revolution. For 30 years, the old Sicilian bosses had been tearing each other apart in blood feuds that dated back centuries. Territory wars, vendettas, honor killings that served no purpose except revenge. Lucky Luciano was about to end all of that. Forever. To understand why Lucky Luciano orchestrated the most important murder in organized crime history, you need to understand New York in 19... The city was a war zone. Two massive crime families were destroying each other in what newspapers called the Castellammarese War. On one side, Giuseppe Masseria, the self-proclaimed boss of all bosses. On the other, Salvatore Maranzano, a Sicilian traditionalist who wanted to recreate the old country's feudal system in America. For 2 years, these men had been killing each other's soldiers like it was medieval Sicily. Bodies dropping every week, territory changing hands daily, businesses getting caught in crossfire. The violence was senseless, endless, and profitable for nobody except the undertakers. Lucky Luciano saw an opportunity in the chaos. But first, he had to eliminate the past. Lucky wasn't born to power. He was born Salvatore Lucania in Sicily, 1897, but came to America as a child. While other Italian kids tried to blend in, Lucky embraced the streets. By age 14, he was running protection rackets. By 18, he was moving serious merchandise. By 25, he was Masseria's most trusted lieutenant. But Lucky was different from the old-school bosses. He didn't care about Sicily. He didn't care about tradition. He didn't care about honor codes that made no sense in America. He cared about money, efficiency, and power. And he saw that the old way of doing business was destroying everything. The breaking point came in March 1931. Masseria had just ordered the execution of 3 of Maranzano's captains in broad daylight outside a Brooklyn social club. The retaliation was swift and brutal. Maranzano's soldiers machine-gunned a Masseria policy bank, killing 6 men and 2 innocent bystanders. That night, Lucky called a secret meeting with 5 other young Turks: Vito Genovese, Frank Costello, Joe Adonis, Albert Anastasia, and Carlo Gambino. These were the future of organized crime. Smart, ruthless, and tired of watching the old bosses destroy their earning potential with pointless wars. This ends now, Lucky told them. We're going to kill them both. Masseria first, then Maranzano. Then we rebuild everything from scratch. The plan was simple in concept, deadly in execution. Lucky would arrange for Masseria to be alone and vulnerable. The hit team would eliminate him. Then Lucky would approach Maranzano, offer to switch sides, and wait for the right moment to eliminate him too. But pulling off the Masseria hit required perfect timing and nerves of steel. Masseria was paranoid, violent, and surrounded by killers. He trusted nobody completely, except Lucky, who had saved his life twice and helped him eliminate dozens of enemies over the years. Lucky spent 3 weeks setting up the assassination. The location had to be perfect. Somewhere Masseria felt safe, but where escape was impossible. Nuova Villa Tammaro in Coney Island was ideal. Masseria loved the restaurant. It was owned by a friend. The neighborhood was quiet. Most importantly, it had only 2 exits, and Lucky could control both. April 15, 1931. Lucky called Masseria that morning. Joe, I got information about Maranzano's next move. Meet me at Villa Tammaro. We'll have lunch, play some cards, discuss strategy. Masseria agreed immediately. He trusted Lucky completely. Why wouldn't he? Lucky had been his most loyal soldier for 7 years. Lucky had killed for him. Lucky had made him millions. Lucky had never given him reason to doubt. At 2:30 p.m., Masseria arrived at the restaurant with 2 bodyguards. Lucky was already there, sitting at a corner table with a deck of cards and a bottle of wine. They ordered food, discussed business, and settled in for what Masseria thought was a routine afternoon of cards and conversation. What Masseria didn't know was that 4 of the deadliest killers in New York were positioned around the restaurant. Vito Genovese was watching the back exit. Albert Anastasia was in a car outside the front. Joe Adonis was at the bar. Bugsy Siegel was in the kitchen, ready to move. At 3:30 p.m., Lucky suggested they play cards to pass time. Masseria loved gambling almost as much as he loved killing. They started with small stakes, just to warm up. Masseria was winning, which put him in an excellent mood. He was relaxed, laughing, telling stories about the old days. At 3:45 p.m., Lucky made his move. "Joe, I gotta use the facilities. Deal me out of this hand." Masseria nodded, focused on his cards. "Take your time, Lucky. These fish ain't going nowhere." Lucky stood up and walked toward the restroom. But instead of going inside, he slipped out the back door where Vito Genovese was waiting. "It's time," Lucky said quietly. "Go." At 3:47 p.m., 4 men entered the dining room. Masseria looked up from his cards, confused. He recognized the faces but didn't understand why they were there. Why they looked so serious. Why their hands were inside their jackets. "Where's Lucky?" Masseria asked. "Lucky sends his regards," Joe Adonis replied, and pulled the trigger. The gunfire lasted maybe 10 seconds. 20 shots fired. Masseria tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The bodyguards went for their weapons but were outgunned 4-2. When the smoke cleared, 3 men were dead. Giuseppe Masseria, the self-proclaimed boss of all bosses, was face down in a pile of playing cards and blood. Lucky returned from the restroom 5 minutes later to find chaos. Police sirens in the distance. Bodies on the floor. Witnesses too terrified to speak coherently. Lucky played his role perfectly. Shocked, confused, demanding to know what happened. "I was in the bathroom." Lucky told the first cops on scene. "I heard shooting, came running out, found this. Who could have done such a thing?" The police investigation went nowhere. The surviving witnesses claimed they saw nothing. The killers had vanished. Lucky's alibi was perfect. As far as anyone could prove, Lucky Luciano was just an innocent survivor of a tragic restaurant shooting. But within hours, every mobster in New York knew the truth. Lucky had orchestrated the hit. The old boss was dead. The war was over, and Lucky Luciano was now the most powerful man in organized crime. Salvatore Maranzano thought he'd won. With Masseria dead, Maranzano declared himself the new boss of all bosses and demanded tribute from every family in New York. He called a meeting of all the surviving leaders and explained his vision: traditional Sicilian hierarchy, rigid command structure, complete obedience to him as supreme leader. Lucky attended that meeting and played his role perfectly. Respectful, submissive, grateful for Maranzano's leadership. But privately, he was planning Maranzano's elimination. 5 months later, in September 1931, Lucky sent 4 men disguised as federal agents to Maranzano's office. They walked in with badges and guns, told Maranzano he was under arrest, and shot him dead while he was reaching for his safe. With both old bosses eliminated, Lucky called a meeting of his own. But this wasn't about declaring himself the new boss of all bosses. This was about eliminating that position forever. "The old way is dead," Lucky told the assembled crime leaders. "No more boss of all bosses. No more blood feuds. No more wars that cost us money and bring heat from the cops. From now on, we operate like a business. 5 families, equal power, territorial agreements, and a commission to settle disputes without violence." This was revolutionary. For the first time in Mafia history, someone was proposing cooperation instead of domination, shared power instead of absolute control, business decisions instead of emotional vendettas. Lucky's commission system worked because it made everyone money. Instead of fighting each other, the families could focus on making profits. Instead of territory wars, they had territorial agreements. Instead of killing competitors, they eliminated outside threats. The structure Lucky created in 1931 lasted for decades. 5 families: Luciano, Genovese, Gambino, Bonanno, and Colombo. Each controlled specific territories and business operations. All disputes were settled by commission vote, not gunfire. Lucky's revolution wasn't just about ending the Castellammarese War. It was about modernizing organized crime. He turned criminal gangs into criminal corporations. He replaced feudal loyalty with business partnerships. He created the template that every crime organization would copy for the next 50 years. But Lucky's success came with a price. In 1936, prosecutor Thomas Dewey built a case against Lucky using testimony from dozens of witnesses. Lucky was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison. The man who had revolutionized organized crime was taken down by the very system he'd tried to modernize. During World War II, Lucky cut a deal with the U.S. government. In exchange for helping protect American ports from sabotage, his sentence was commuted. In 1946, he was deported to Italy, where he lived in exile until his death in 1962. Lucky Luciano never saw the full impact of what he'd created. The commission system he designed survived his imprisonment, his exile, and his death. The 5 families he established continued operating for decades. The business model he pioneered was copied by criminal organizations worldwide. The assassination of Giuseppe Masseria wasn't just a mob hit. It was the moment organized crime evolved from medieval blood feuds to modern criminal enterprises. Lucky Don Luciano proved that violence could be a tool rather than a way of life, that cooperation could be more profitable than competition, that smart criminals build systems, not just body counts. Today, law enforcement agencies study Lucky's commission system as the foundation of modern organized crime. His innovations in criminal management, territorial agreements, and dispute resolution became the template for every major crime syndicate that followed. The Last Supper at Villa Tammaro lasted 4 hours, but its consequences lasted for generations. Lucky Luciano walked into that restaurant as a lieutenant. He walked out as the architect of the American Mafia. All it took was 20 bullets and the vision to see that the future belonged to those smart enough to learn from the past's mistakes. The old bosses fought for honor. Lucky fought for power. The old bosses died for tradition. Lucky lived to build an empire, and sometimes, evolution requires elimination. If this story of calculated power and criminal innovation moved you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you understand that the most dangerous revolutionaries are the ones who smile while they destroy everything. Share this with someone who knows that sometimes the greatest changes happen over lunch. What would you have done if you were sitting at that table? Let me know in the comments below.